1:12 a.m. Wire $38,500 now, or your mother won't survive. The words came through my phone in my father's voice, low and shaking like he was standing in a hospital hallway with bad reception. I was sitting upright in bed before I understood I had moved. The room was dark, but my chest felt bright and exposed like someone had switched on a light inside it. He said she was fading. He said there wasn't time. I could hear what sounded like machines in the background, a steady beeping, distant mechanical. My fingers were already reaching for my banking app. I remember the cold glow of the screen against my face. $38,500. A number heavy enough to change a life. Heavy enough to end one. I asked which hospital. He didn't answer that. He just said, now. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories like this. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with you all. Now let me take you back to that night. It was still 112 degrees outside, even at 1:12 a.m. Arizona heat doesn't disappear after sunset. It lingers, presses against the glass, seeps through concrete. My apartment was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioner working harder than it should have to. The phone had vibrated once before I answered. I remember staring at my father's name on the screen. Robert. It felt strange seeing it that late. He never called past 9. When I picked up, he was breathing hard, not crying, not shouting, just breathless like he'd run upstairs. He said my mother, Patricia, had collapsed. Heat stroke, he said. Then more urgently, they think it's severe. She's in the ER. I swung my legs off the bed too fast and nearly stumbled, the sheet wrapped around my ankle. My heart was racing ahead of my thoughts. I could hear what sounded like movement on his end, maybe a cart rolling, maybe a door closing, or maybe it was just wind against a phone speaker. It's strange how memory edits itself. He told me they needed $38,500 immediately. The hospital wouldn't move forward with emergency surgery without a wire. They won't prep the OR until we confirm payment, he said. His voice hardened on that sentence, as if he were reading something official, as if this were procedure. I asked which hospital. Don't waste time, he snapped. It's not important. Not important. The air conditioner kicked on again, a dull mechanical breath. My skin felt cold, but sweat collected along my spine. I walked toward the kitchen without realizing it, my phone pressed tight against my ear as if pressure might make the story clearer. He said her organs were shutting down from heat. Said if we delayed, she could go into cardiac arrest within 20 minutes. 20 minutes? He repeated that. Not once. Twice. I stared at the microwave clock glowing green in the dark. 1:14. 20 minutes. The numbers settled into my chest like a timer I couldn't see, but could feel ticking behind my ribs. He didn't describe the room. Didn't describe her. No doctor's name, no nurse. Just urgency. Just the amount. $38,500. Precise. Too precise. I opened my banking app anyway. My hands were steady. That's what I remember most. Not shaking. Just steady. I had the money. Years of careful saving. Bonuses. Deferred travel. I had it. But something in his breathing didn't change when I hesitated. It didn't crack. It didn't break. It stayed measured. And suddenly I remembered last summer. Kimberly sitting at my kitchen table with her head in her hands. $12,000 in credit card debt. She'd said it was temporary. Said she just needed help one time. My parents had told me family shows up when it matters. I wired the money that afternoon. 2 months later, she posted photos with a new SUV. My father's voice cut back in. Are you doing it? The microwave clock read 1:16. 4 minutes gone. He said if I loved my mother, I wouldn't ask questions. That landed differently than the medical details. Softer. Sharper. I asked again which hospital. Silence. Then just send it. Outside, somewhere in the desert dark, a siren wailed faintly. It didn't sound close. It didn't sound urgent. It just sounded ordinary. I realized I couldn't hear my mother in the background. No machines. No voices addressing her. No chaos. Only my father breathing. And the clock moving forward. The microwave clock turned to 1:17. I could feel the pressure building not in my chest anymore, but in the silence between us. He was waiting for confirmation, for the click of a keyboard, for the sound of obedience. I asked again, slower this time. Dad, what hospital are you at? There was a shift in his breathing. Not panic, irritation. I told you don't waste time with that, he said. Your mother doesn't have time for this. I need the name. The words felt heavier than they should have. Simple, direct. But they landed like defiance. He exhaled sharply. What is wrong with you? His voice rose for the first time. Your mother could die in 20 minutes and you're interrogating me. Do you hear yourself? You're being cold? You're being selfish? Cold. That word has followed me most of my life. I stood there in the dark kitchen, bare feet on cool tile, staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't look cold. I looked awake. That was all. And then, without meaning to, I remembered Kimberly crying at my table last summer, hands trembling just enough, mascara smudged carefully under one eye, saying she didn't know how it got so bad, saying she felt ashamed. My father had stood behind her chair, hand on her shoulder, telling me she just needed a break. That family steps in. I had wired $12,000 before dessert. 2 weeks later, she posted photos from Sedona. Red rocks, new sunglasses, the SUV visible in the background if you looked closely. Are you sending it? My father asked again. I let the silence stretch. No, I said quietly. Have Kimberly handle it this time. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just steady. There was no immediate response, just air moving through the receiver. 5 seconds. 5 full seconds of nothing. Then he said my name not gently, and something in his tone shifted from urgency to something colder. Not fear. Not grief. Calculation. You'll regret this, he said. The line went dead. I didn't hang up right away. I stayed there listening to the absence of sound until the screen dimmed in my hand. When I finally lowered the phone, the apartment felt different. Not quiet. Hollow. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling fan turn slow circles in the dark. At some point, the sky outside the window softened from black to deep gray. At 7:30 a.m., someone knocked on my door. Not tentative, not frantic, just firm, professional. I knew before I stood up that this wasn't about my mother. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway when I opened it. Their expressions were neutral, almost apologetic. Madeline Harper, one of them asked. I nodded. They asked if I had attempted to wire $38,500 overnight, if I had authorized an emergency transfer to an LLC connected to a Harper family account. My stomach dropped in a way it hadn't during the call. No, I said. I didn't send anything. They exchanged a look. There was a flagged transaction at 1:18 a.m. The taller officer continued. Someone initiated a login from a device linked to your prior family IP address. 1:18. 2 minutes after I said no. They explained that my bank's fraud system had frozen the transfer before completion. Multiple failed authentication attempts. Someone had tried to override 2-factor verification. I leaned against the doorframe because the hallway felt suddenly unstable. Are you sure you didn't share your credentials with anyone? The other officer asked gently. I thought about last Thanksgiving. Logging into my email on my parents' desktop to print flight details. Telling Kimberly the temporary code out loud because my hands were full. I felt the cold then. Not from the air conditioning, Not from the tile, from understanding. The 20-minute countdown had never been about my mother's heart. It had been about mine. It had been about my heart. That realization stayed with me as I invited the officers inside. They didn't sit. They stood near the kitchen counter while I scrolled through my call log showing them the timestamp. 1:12 a.m. My father's name. His real number. Later that afternoon, I found myself in a small interview room at Scottsdale PD across from Detective Logan Pierce. He had a calm way of speaking, not rushed, not sympathetic. Just precise. He turned his monitor slightly toward me. "The call you received was spoofed," he said. "The system masked the origin. It displayed your father's real number." I stared at the screen. The digits were unmistakable. I'd memorized them as a child. "So it wasn't him?" I asked. Pierce didn't answer immediately. The number was real. The routing wasn't. He explained how easy it had become. Voice over IP masking, caller ID manipulation. Enough to convince someone already in a state of fear. Enough to make urgency feel legitimate. He scrolled again. At 1:19 a.m., a text message was sent to you with wiring instructions. I hadn't even opened it during the call. I'd been too focused on the voice, the countdown. Now I saw it, a short message containing the name of an LLC and routing details. K. Harper Holdings, LLC. The timestamp felt deliberate. 1 minute after the login attempt began, the bank flagged the wire before completion, Pierce continued. Authentication failed twice. Whoever attempted it had your social security number. They also attempted to override two-factor verification. I felt something tighten in my throat. My social security number wasn't written down anywhere in my apartment. It lived in encrypted files, in secure memory. They knew the answers to your security questions, he added. The room felt smaller. That evening, I went into work anyway. Routine can feel like control. My office sat on the 10th floor of a glass building that trapped heat all day. Even after sunset, the walls radiated warmth. Around 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with an internal alert. Unusual access attempt. I frowned at the notification and logged into the security dashboard. There it was. An authentication ping against my employee credentials at 1:21 a.m. The system had denied it wrong device signature, but the attempt had been logged. Same window of time, same pattern. I was still staring at the screen when Angela Brooks appeared at my office door. She didn't smile. "Can you step into Conference B?" she asked quietly. The room was small. No windows. The lights hummed faintly overhead. She closed the door behind us. "We detected an attempted login from a residential IP associated with your previous registered devices," she said. Her tone was measured, professional, but softer than usual. "My parents' house," I said before she finished. She didn't nod. She didn't need to. "Someone used a device that has previously authenticated successfully for you," she continued. "It failed this time because of our device fingerprinting update last quarter." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the table's wood grain, my reflection blurred in its surface. Angela hesitated, then added, "It wasn't random. Whoever tried knew your habits. They knew your timing. I thought about Thanksgiving, about logging into my email on my parents' desktop, about reading a verification code aloud while Kimberly hovered nearby offering to help." Angela's voice dropped slightly. "Whoever did this used a device familiar to your family environment. The words didn't accuse. They didn't judge. They simply aligned. The phone call, the spoofed number, the LLC name, the login attempts, the timing 1:18, 1:19, 1:21. Not chaos. Sequence." I sat there in that small room feeling the last fragments of denial slide quietly into place. The heat outside the building hadn't broken. It still pressed against the glass. Still waited. But something inside me had cooled completely. Something inside me had cooled completely. The next morning, I sat across from Detective Pierce again, this time with my phone placed face up between us like evidence in a trial neither of us wanted to name yet. "Let's verify the hospital," he said. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't soften it either. He dialed Scottsdale General Hospital on speaker and placed the call on the desk. I listened to the automated system cycle through options: emergency services, patient records, operator. My fingers were folded tightly in my lap. I realized I was holding my breath. When a woman finally came on the line, Pierce identified himself and asked if a Patricia Harper had been admitted between midnight and 2 a.m. the previous night for heat-related complications. There was a pause while she checked. I stared at the wall behind him. It was painted an indifferent beige. I focused on a small scratch near the light switch. "No detective," she said at last. "We have no patient by that name in the last 48 hours. Pierce thanked her and ended the call. For a second, just a second, I felt relief. Clean, bright relief. My mother wasn't dying. She hadn't collapsed. There was no surgery waiting for payment. Then the relief shifted. It didn't dissolve into panic. It hardened. Pierce leaned back slightly in his chair. "This fits a pattern we've seen," he said. "It's called family emergency fraud. The caller creates urgency, impersonates a trusted relative, demands immediate funds before verification." I nodded slowly. "But this case is layered," he continued. "The spoofed number matched your father's. The login attempts came from a residential IP previously associated with your credentials." He turned his monitor toward me again. "K. Harper Holdings, LLC." The name sat on the screen like something that had always been there waiting. "My parents mentioned once they were helping Kimberly start a small business," I said quietly. "Something about consulting or online sales." It never sounded formal. Pierce didn't interrupt. "They said it was temporary," I added. "Just paperwork. Just structure." He clicked into another window. Technical logs. Rows of timestamps and IP traces. He highlighted a string of numbers. "This IP address," he said, "matches the registered Wi-Fi at your parents' home in Fountain Hills." The room seemed to narrow around that sentence. "You're sure?" I asked. "Yes." He didn't hesitate. Not even slightly. I thought about the layout of that house. The kitchen where Kimberly liked to sit with her laptop. The small office off the hallway where my father kept tax documents in a metal filing cabinet. The router blinking quietly on the shelf above the desk. I pictured the glow of a screen at 1:18 a.m. I remembered my father saying 20 minutes. I remembered the failed authentication attempts, the override, the precision of the amount. $38,500. Not rounded, not estimated, calculated. Pierce spoke again, but his voice felt farther away now. "This is no longer about an external scammer," he said. "The digital footprint suggests proximity, familiarity. Familiarity." That word carried more weight than fraud. I leaned back in the chair and looked at my hands. They were steady, not trembling, not clenched, just still. The suspicion I'd been holding at arm's length was no longer abstract. It had coordinates, a physical location, a router, a desk, a family name. It wasn't a possibility anymore. It was alignment. I thought of my father's voice repeating 20 minutes. I thought of my mother's silence in the background. I thought of Kimberly's SUV parked in their driveway last month when I drove by unannounced. No hospital, no surgery, just a house on a quiet street with a strong Wi-Fi signal. The doubt that had protected me for years finally dissolved. What remained wasn't shock. It was recognition. What remained wasn't shock. It was recognition. Detective Pierce closed the file on his screen and looked at me for a long moment as if measuring something quieter than evidence. "We can push this further," he said. "If you're willing." I didn't ask what that meant. I already understood. The pattern had formed. Now it needed confirmation. He suggested we respond. Text your father, he said. Tell him you're ready to wire the money, but you need confirmation from the hospital. Something official. The word official felt almost ironic. I held my phone in both hands. It looked ordinary, harmless, just glass and light. I opened the thread with my father. The last message was from him. You'll regret this. I typed slowly. I'm ready to transfer the $38,500. I need the hospital confirmation code for the wire. I stared at the screen before pressing send. My thumb hesitated only once. The message went through. We waited. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of voices from the hallway outside Pierce's office. I could hear my own breathing steady now. No rush. No spike. The reply came faster than I expected. There's no time for codes. Just send it. It was my father's number. The tone was clipped. Impatient. Pierce leaned forward slightly. Ask for the full legal name of the LLC. Say your bank requires exact registration details. I typed again. Bank requires full legal name and registration details for K. Harper Holdings before release. Please confirm. The seconds stretched, not in panic, in clarity. Then another message appeared. It's K. Harper Holdings LLC, same as sent. Just use that. Pierce shook his head slightly. Full registration. Middle name if applicable. I typed again. Need full registered name exactly as filed with the state. There was a longer pause this time. When the phone buzzed again, the number was the same. But the tone was different. Less controlled. More hurried. Kimberly Ann Harper. Managing member. K. Harper. Holdings. LLC. The message wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I could see the shift in phrasing. My father never used titles like that. He barely understood what managing member meant. I felt my heartbeat slow. Not accelerate. Slow. There is a moment when fear leaves the body and something else replaces it. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Just stillness. Pierce asked me to scroll up. He pointed at a small detail I might have missed: the email address embedded in the earlier wire instructions. It ended with a familiar username. One Kimberly had used since college. Then another message came through almost immediately after the previous one. Please just do it. Mom doesn't have much time. But this time, beneath the text attached to the automated banking instruction format was a digital signature block. Kimberly A. Harper, Managing Member. K. Harper Holdings. LLC. It wasn't meant for me to notice. It was part of the template she'd copied. But it was there. Clear. Official. Unhidden. Pierce didn't speak right away. He let the weight of it settle between us. My hands were resting calmly on the table. I noticed how quiet my body felt. The panic from the night before had burned itself out. In its place was something colder. Sharper. Pierce finally nodded once. That's enough, he said. Between the IP logs, the attempted access, and this confirmation, we have probable cause. He stood and gathered the printed screenshots. We can request a search warrant. The word warrant echoed softly in my mind. Not accusation. Not confrontation. Procedure. I looked down at my phone one more time. At my sister's full name. At the formal structure of the lie. The 20-minute countdown had ended. And in its place was something far more permanent. The 20-minute countdown had ended. In its place sat a name. Kimberly Ann Harper. Not Kim. Not my sister's softer nickname. Not a vague LLC abbreviation. Her full legal name. Clean. Formal. Filed with the state. I stared at it longer than I needed to, as if repetition might change the letters. It didn't. And as I sat there, another memory surfaced. Not dramatic, not urgent, just ordinary. Kimberly standing in my parents' driveway last fall, sunlight flashing against the windshield of a brand new SUV. She'd laughed when I asked how she could afford it after the financial disaster she'd described weeks earlier. Said she'd figured something out. Said it wasn't my problem anymore. At the time, I'd chosen not to ask what she meant. Detective Pierce printed every log entry, every timestamp, every screenshot of the text thread. The printer hummed steadily, each sheet sliding out like a quiet confirmation. That's when Officer Brian Keller entered the room. He was introduced simply digital forensics, late 30s, measured tone, the kind of presence that didn't draw attention to itself but absorbed everything. He carried a tablet and a thin folder. He didn't sit right away. He glanced at the printed logs, then at me. "We analyzed the device signature used in the attempted login," he said. "The fingerprint matches a laptop previously authenticated under your streaming account." "My streaming account," I repeated. "Netflix," he clarified. "Your credentials were entered on a device in Fountain Hills about 8 months ago. Thanksgiving." I felt it then. Not a jolt. More like a quiet alignment of memory. I'd logged into my account on my parents' living room laptop so we could watch something after dinner. Kimberly had been sitting beside me on the couch. I remembered laughing about the absurdity of sharing passwords as adults. I remembered typing slowly, speaking the two-factor code out loud when it arrived. I hadn't logged out. Keller continued. "That same device initiated the bank login attempt at 1:18 a.m. There it was. Clean. Direct." I didn't ask if he was certain. The evidence had moved past doubt. "I saved my login," I said quietly. "I didn't think about it." Keller gave a small nod. Not judgment, just acknowledgement. "The attempt failed because of device recognition changes implemented by your bank and employer," he said. "But the origin is consistent." Consistent. That word echoed in the same way familiarity had earlier. Pierce gathered the final stack of papers and clipped them together. The room felt heavier now, but not chaotic. Structured. Like a case assembling itself piece by piece. "We'll be requesting a warrant," Pierce said. "Given the IP match, the LLC documentation, and the device signature, we have grounds." He paused before adding, "You don't have to be present when we execute it." I looked down at my hands. They were resting calmly on the table again. "I'll come," I said. It surprised even me how steady my voice sounded. Fountain Hills wasn't far. 25 minutes northeast. Desert hills, quiet streets. The house where I learned to ride a bike. Where I studied for exams at the kitchen counter. Where my mother once told me that trust is the one thing you don't measure. I stood as they began preparing paperwork. There was no dramatic swell inside me. No collapse. Just the sense that I was walking towards something inevitable. Like stepping into the final chapter of a book you already understand, but haven't finished reading. The sun outside had begun to lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot as we exited the station. The heat hadn't broken yet. It rarely does before dusk. I slid into the back seat of the unmarked car. As we pulled onto the highway toward Fountain Hills, I watched the desert stretch out ahead of us, flat, silent, indifferent. It felt less like a confrontation, and more like an ending that had been waiting for years. It felt less like a confrontation, more like an ending that had been waiting. We pulled into the driveway at 5:40 p.m. The desert light had softened, but the heat still clung to the pavement, rising in faint waves. I hadn't been back to the house in 3 months. It looked unchanged. Beige stucco. Trimmed hedges. The same wind chime near the porch that had been there since I was 12. Officer Keller stepped out first. Detective Pierce followed. I stayed a few steps behind them. They knocked. Not violently, not aggressively, just firm. The door opened before a second knock was needed. My mother, Patricia, was standing in the yard to the right of the entryway, a green hose coiled loosely in her hand. She was watering the bougainvillea near the fence. Her hair was tied back. She wore the same wide-brimmed hat she always used during summer evenings. She looked up confused at first. Then she saw the uniforms. Her hand froze mid-air. Water spilled onto the gravel pooling around her sandals. She wasn't pale. She wasn't weak. She wasn't recovering from surgery. She was perfectly fine. My father opened the door fully when he recognized me behind the officers. His face changed in a way I'd never seen before. Not anger, not defensiveness. Something like calculation unraveling. Detective Pierce held up the document. Robert Harper, we have a warrant to search this residence in connection with attempted wire fraud and identity misuse. My father didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just stepped back. Inside the house smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly sweet. It felt smaller than I remembered. Kimberly was standing in the kitchen, her back half turned toward the entryway. She held her phone in one hand. When she saw the officers, her fingers tightened around it instinctively. Her eyes moved from Pierce to Keller, then to me. No one spoke at first. Pierce began calmly. He laid out the timeline, the spoofed call. The 1:18 a.m. Logan attempt. The IP address traced to this house. The LLC registered under Kimberly Ann Harper. The digital signature. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Kimberly's composure cracked before my father's did. Her shoulders lifted and fell sharply as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. It wasn't supposed to go that far, she said. It was just temporary. We just needed help. Temporary. The word sounded rehearsed. My father tried to interrupt, but Pierce held up a hand. Kimberly kept speaking faster now. We were going to tell you, she said, looking at me. We thought you'd understand if it was urgent. My mother stepped closer, then water still dripping from the end of the hose behind her. She always has money, she said quietly. Not to the officers, to the room. You've always been careful. You've always had savings. You've never said no to your mother. There it was. Not panic. Not confusion. Expectation. The house felt very still in that moment. The ticking of the hallway clock sounded louder than it should have, the same clock that used to mark my curfew in high school. I stood in the center of the living room, the room where birthday parties had been held, where Christmas mornings had unfolded, and I waited for anger to arrive. It didn't. What came instead was emptiness, not devastation, not fury, just a quiet absence where something used to live. My father finally spoke, his voice lower now. We thought you'd wire it, he said. You always do. Always. The officers began moving through the house, documenting devices. Keller stepped toward the small office off the hallway, the room with the blinking router I had pictured in my mind the night before. Kimberly sank into a kitchen chair, her phone slipping from her hand onto the table. It wasn't meant to hurt you, she said, barely audible. But the hurt had never been the point. Standing there in the room where I had once memorized multiplication tables and college acceptance letters, I realized something simple. They hadn't misjudged my finances. They had misjudged my limits. They had misjudged my limits. The paperwork came quickly after that. No one was handcuffed that evening. No one was taken away in the back of a cruiser. Financial crimes move differently, slower, procedural, precise. A week later, we were seated in a small conference room at the county building. Neutral walls, fluorescent lighting, a long table that felt too narrow for what sat across from it. My parents were offered a diversion agreement. First-time financial offense, cooperation, restitution. It sounded almost clinical. They would be required to repay investigative costs. The LLCK. Harper Holdings would be frozen pending dissolution, mandatory financial counseling, oversight, compliance checks. It was framed as an opportunity. My father nodded at each condition as if agreeing to routine maintenance on a vehicle. Controlled, mechanical. Kimberly kept her eyes down. When the prosecutor asked if they understood the terms, my father answered for all of them, yes. Later, in a smaller side room, he turned to me. "We didn't think it would escalate like this," he said quietly. "We thought you'd just wire it like you always do." There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment, not in himself, in the miscalculation. Kimberly spoke next, her words spilling over each other. "The SUV payment is higher than I expected. Insurance too, and things just kept piling up." I panicked. Panicked. I studied her face while she said it. Her breathing was steady, her tone measured. "You drafted an LLC," I said. "You set up routing instructions. You used two-factor override attempts." She didn't answer. My voice stayed calm, even to my own ears. "This wasn't panic," I said. "It was planning." The room felt very still after that. Angela Brooks testified briefly during the formal review. She spoke about the system logs, the timestamps, the authentication failures. Her language was technical, unemotional, clean. She never looked at my family directly. She didn't need to. The evidence had already settled. When the paperwork was placed in front of me, the prosecutor asked gently, "Are you certain you wish to proceed? You are not obligated to pursue this." It was the only moment that felt like a choice. I thought about the 1:12 a.m. call, the countdown, the word selfish, the certainty in my father's voice when he said I would regret it. I picked up the pen. "Yes," I said. I signed. The sound of the pen against paper was small. Final. Afterward, my mother approached me in the hallway. Her voice was softer than it had been at the house. "We never meant for it to go this far," she said. I believed her. But I also understood something else. They hadn't meant for it to stop. The legal agreement meant oversight, monthly financial disclosures, account monitoring, compliance meetings. Their family dynamic, once invisible, was now documented, structured, observed. Our relationship was no longer private. It had a case number. As we walked out of the building, the sun was lower, the heat finally beginning to loosen its grip on the air. My father didn't look back at me. Kimberly did. But I didn't see guilt in her expression. I saw the slow realization that something had shifted permanently. Not in the law. In me. Not in the law. In me. The first conversation after the agreement wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting. No final speech. It happened in my kitchen a few days later over speakerphone. "I won't be providing financial help anymore," I said. The sentence felt clean, uncomplicated. There was a pause on the other end. My father began to respond, but I didn't let him build momentum. No loans, no emergency wires, no covering debt. If something happens, you handle it. My mother tried a softer approach. "We're still family." "Yes," I said, "but family doesn't mean access." The call ended without resolution, without reconciliation, just distance. That week, I froze my credit across all bureaus. I changed every password I'd ever reused: banking, email, streaming. I enabled hardware authentication keys. I removed my devices from any network previously linked to Fountain Hills. It felt less like paranoia and more like hygiene. I also created something new, a code phrase, a single sentence agreed upon in writing to be used only in a verified emergency. Something simple, something impossible to improvise under pressure. If it wasn't said exactly right, I would assume it wasn't real. It wasn't about distrust. It was about structure. I started therapy a month later, not because of the fraud alone, but because I began to see the pattern beneath it. The years of subtle obligation, the praise when I provided, the silence when I hesitated, the way urgency had always been their tool. My therapist once asked me when I first learned that love required proof. I didn't answer right away. Angela stopped by my office one evening after most people had left. The building had that quiet echo it gets after 6 p.m. You handled this with clarity, she said. We're building an internal investigations unit next quarter. You'd be good at it. I almost laughed at the irony. From being investigated by family to investigating systems. But she was right. I understood patterns. I understood manipulation disguised as crisis. A few weeks later, I accepted the promotion. My apartment feels different now. Not quieter, just lighter. The air conditioner still hums at night. The desert heat still presses against the glass, but the space inside the rooms no longer feels like something is waiting to be taken. It feels owned. Sometimes my phone still vibrates after midnight. Spam calls. Unknown numbers. Automated reminders. The first time it happened after everything, I opened my eyes in the dark and listened. My heart didn't race. I didn't sit upright. I didn't reach immediately for the banking app. I simply let it ring once more before checking the screen. It wasn't my father's number. Even if it had been, I would have asked for the code phrase. I understand something now that I didn't at 1:12 a.m. that night. Boundaries are not revenge. They are not punishment. They are not abandonment. They are quiet decisions made in calm rooms so that panic cannot control you again. For the first time in my life, when the phone lights up in the dark, I don't feel responsible for whatever voice is on the other end. I feel steady. And that steadiness is mine.